Welcome to Automotive EV. My name is Peter Wooding and thank you for joining us. Today I'm delighted to be welcoming Christopher Godfrey from Volvo Cars, who has kindly agreed to sort of have a chat through and cover his topics or his points about how the business is going. So Chris, great to see you.
Yeah, nice to see you, Peter, and thanks for asking me. It's been a while.
Yeah, it's been a while, but it's a pleasure that you've joined us. I suppose, given the fact that we're in the midst of this pandemic, we probably should start off with a question on that. So then, hopefully, we can try to push it behind us and move on to other things. But from your perspective, and generally from Volvo, how has the pandemic affected the business? And how is it affecting it currently?
I think it's obviously the most pertinent question right now, and I think we've gone through different phases of it, pretty much the same as everybody else. And I'm not talking about lockdowns, I'm talking about business continuity and interruptions and things like that, of that nature. And because of our global footprint, I think, same as a lot of the big automotive makers these days, we've gone through that, like first phase China, second phase Europe, third phase US. But Volvo Cars came back very, very quickly. We were the last to close, the first to reopen. And we managed to do the business in such a way that we sort of exceeded expectations in H2 last year, and delivered a lot of volume over and above what had ever been delivered before. And for me, the biggest impacts are probably on intra-European short sea shipping, but also the deep sea maritime and intercontinental flows were probably the hardest to recover, to get moving at the frequency and level that all OEMs would probably like. I think general transportation, I think the industry did a brilliant job in being able to do what it needed to do to support the demands that we had. And I think, as I said, we recovered relatively quickly and have been on a really strong footing since probably June, July last year, until we hit the current issues that we're having with semiconductors. And again, the same as everybody else, we have disruption and we've selectively stopped plants where it's appropriate, but we've never stopped delivering volume. And only last month again, we've had the report on the Q1 results for Volvo Cars. Obviously quoting increases versus 2020, but internally we look at the results versus 2019, and actually month on month they're better towards double-digit numbers month on month versus 2019, which for us is probably the real measure right now as opposed to last year. So I think we're doing quite well, but the disruption now is getting harder with semiconductors, and as I say, the delivery volume is still going, but what we can see now is a reduction on stock on hand available to support sales. So I think for some of our providers, it'll be harder for them to maintain the right commercial viability option, let's say, with us pushing still on our KPIs of lead time achievement ratio and on-time delivery. So I think we're experiencing a bit more difficulty from that aspect with the supply base this time than previously, actually. But it's, as you know, Peter, it's a constantly evolving situation. And from week to week, we're looking at what works and what doesn't work. The good news is we don't have any storage capacity issues, and we haven't done since I came in last year, around about April last year. So that was one good element of it. But it continues, let's say.
Going on to semiconductors for a minute, sort of, or staying with it rather. How do you overcome this backlog? Where are you going to be sort of doing the fitting and all the bits that's necessary?
It's a good question. I think up till now, we've managed to realign our expectations for H1. And then with supply that we see visible, we'll pretty much recover everything in H2. Based on the volume information that we have, the forecasts that we have right now in terms of part supply. But as I just said, that could change tomorrow. You just don't know with this thing how much it's going to evolve and develop. And I think from our point of view, you know, we are intelligently using the supply that we have thinking not just about now and what we want to build where, but where do we really want to be when we start up again in all the plants, to maximise what we want to do, and obviously try to keep as much as close as possible to our original plans and achieve the volume plan for the year. And there's a lot of work and effort going into that. I think from an outbound perspective, maybe is one of the challenges we do have, and we have seen with semiconductors, is VPC processing, for example, for parts in ports in the US, where there is semiconductor content in parts. We've had restricted supplies, and we're then looking at the options available to the customer. Can we sell something without a particular option, which may be semiconductor heavily dependent, and still sell cars? And we seem to be doing that quite successfully. So fingers crossed, the customer demand keeps up with what we would like to sell from a volume point of view, even if some of the options they may have had before aren't available. Yeah.
So they would then get fitted by the dealer afterwards, would they?
Potentially not. They're trying to buy cars that maybe don't have an option available at that time. Obviously, from a customer point of view, if they want to accessorize later when parts become available, that will be something the customer may consider. But we're looking at those options, and do we have supply to be able to fit, instead of giving a customer promise date with accessorization and then not being able to deliver on the delivery promise. So I think we're being quite intelligent in that regard, and I'd be surprised if a lot of other OEMs aren't doing the same as well. You know.
Well, it does make sense, doesn't it? You keep
absolutely.
The metal moving and customers happy.
Yeah, so, exactly.
Coming on to a different topic now. Obviously, Volvo car sales and your industrial footprint. What has this meant for the OBL organisation up to now? And how do you think that's going to evolve in the future?
Yeah, it's a very good question. If you look at the industrial footprint since 2010, obviously when Geely came in, it's grown significantly. And we were looking at average distances travelled for Volvo cars, looking at some data and trying to work some solutions last year. And some of the numbers are quite frightening as average distances. A lot of the product obviously comes out of China these days, like XC60 from Chengdu. And we use rail to manage that. But what it's meant for the organisation, you know, part of the organisation when I came in last year was just moving to a global organisation. So instead of being regional logistics, it became a global organisation under Martin Corner. And we've had to, over that 1 year, in probably quite a difficult year, develop that global organisation, the reporting structures and everything goes with it. But at the same time, it probably brought the regional outbound logistics people together at exactly the right moment to become much more effective in how we manage the intercontinental supply chains between China, Europe, and Europe and the US in particular, because of the difficulty of things like intercontinental capacity. So timing-wise, Mr. Corner couldn't have picked a better time to build a global organisation. And we really saw the benefit of that in the first half of last year. And actually, the pandemic probably forced the effectiveness of that to be accelerated, which was very good from my point of view. And obviously, the key part of that was the communication and constant communication across the different time zones. But I have to say it was very, very effective from what is effectively my teams around the world. I think the difficulty, like anything else, and I'm sure this resonates with a lot of people, is I've never physically met my regional heads in China or the US or even the teams who did such a great job last year and continue to do it this year. And very much would like to meet them and actually not just meet them, but visit all of the facilities to get a better grasp on the operations that we're running. There's only certain things you can do virtually and from a distance, even live video feeds, and that doesn't always give you the right perception of what's happening. So I think for us, it's very much, and it will be, if we get back to that position of being able to travel soon, something that we still want to do to make sure that we're getting all of the benefits that we can out of a global organisation compared to what we get now. But yeah, very challenging. But I think the team came right to the front lines, let's say, and delivered what they needed to do.
I think with this sort of situation, I'll call it, that we're all in, I'm finding it staggering how much we've been able to achieve the levels virtually. Yeah, it's.
I personally find it amazing in terms of what not just the automotive industry, but everything globally has been able to do. You know, we were talking off camera before we started. You know, I've only been home twice since I came to Sweden to see my family, but I've been able to communicate every evening ever since I got here, and I can imagine that wouldn't have been so easy without that capability. And we all know that picking up a phone or doing a video call is a lot better than just sending an email if you've got a particular crisis to deal with. And I think the emergence of Zoom, bigger than it was before the pandemic started, and all of these things like Teams meetings really demonstrate what is possible in the virtual world. But I still feel as human beings, we have this need that we need to have some level of physical interaction at some point. It for sure does not need to go back to the same level as it was before. But I, as a person, I've always been one of those people that at least like to visit somewhere once so that you understand what you're talking about. And if you're talking about port facilities or VPC processing centers, it's very difficult to capture everything that's going on through a camera. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah.
So I think it's been great, but I still think there's things that we as human beings, as business and opportunity seekers, still need to see. Yeah.
Yeah, we still need to see. We need to meet. We need to do the non-work activities with people as well, where you get that greater bonding. But I've been amazed with. We've all had to adjust. We've had to rethink how we did it, and for me, we need to go back to having an in-person level, but you said before, it doesn't have to be what it used to be.
No.
And because we are able to achieve it. And from a cost perspective, when you're having to fly out all over China and everywhere else, it will eliminate some of that.
Yeah, my personal feeling is that you may do one elongated trip a year.
Yeah.
You know, so it becomes much more substantive, qualitative for the people that are part of your organization, and gives you time to spend time with them. And then the rest of it can be virtually,
Yes. Yeah.
Because you've established a contact, you understand what you're doing. Everybody has a vision and an expectation of what you really want from them and what they need from you, more importantly. And, that's a good way ahead, I think. I'd be shocked if the world went back to what it was before or what I was traveling before, for sure. Yeah.
I want to go on now a little bit to your sort of the greater Volvo, as I'll call it, your affiliated brands. You've got, Polestar, Link. What's the logistics setup for that, and how are you integrating it with the Volvo setup of old?
Yeah, they're quite different in terms of the way that they're set up and their commercial business setup. They're very much driven by online sales. The Polestar, I don't know whether it was fortunate or unfortunate last year, but I learned a lot about Polestar because Polestar launched in the summer period here last year when effectively Volvo Cars were shut down for a month with summer holidays. And I was here helping to cover that. And it was a very interesting launch. The market diversification is quite limited to start off with and goes into a second phase. But the Polestar vehicles, we have visibility and operational control from the minute they come out of the factory in Luqiao in China, all the way through to arriving in Zeebrugge in Belgium. But the Link & Co vehicles, we don't really see anything of until they get shipped from China. And then we receive shipping advice information into our systems from Geely Systems. And they are running a single stocking point model. out of Zeebrugge, whereas Polestar has multiple stocking points currently, very much along the lines of what Volvo Cars traditionally does as well, but with limited market coverage. And clearly, Polestar was very different for us because it was the first fully electric vehicle that we dealt with, even though it didn't have a Volvo badge on. Yeah. It was the first fully electric vehicle, which meant our preparation in terms of network support, charging facilities, things like software upgrade capabilities and all of that. With all of these new cars that are being delivered by OEMs, the software side becomes so much more important now than the mechanical side. And there was times, and there have been times when I've reflected about getting cars off ships. It would be so much easier if it was an old ICE type car than it is a battery driven car. Because I think the level of complexity that's now coming in the supply chain from fully electric cars, and Lynk & Co is hybrid currently, is a different dimension, not just for us as logisticians working in OEMs, but the supply base itself. And I've had a lot of communication about that from the transport world in particular, about the difficulties that it brings. Obviously, they're online. LNC is a subscription service, Polestar is buying. So the subscription from LNC, we have nothing to do with the commercial side of LNC. It's run by LNC itself. Yeah. We're just managing the distribution and logistics on their behalf, although they appear the supply is direct. Whereas with Polestar, we contract it on their behalf. We provide a service as Volvo Cars, and we are responsible for everything to do with their business in terms of KPIs, whereas with LNC, we don't. They are managing themselves. Yeah. So it is a little bit different from what we've got. It's minimal market coverage. With Polestar, it's very defined customer handover dates as opposed to the typical Volvo Cars, please deliver within a set period of time. So it has brought different challenges, but I would say opportunity to prepare for the future of Volvo Cars as it moves massively to global online sales and full electrification. So a good testing bed for us with the different models, the commercial models, the different vehicle types, and the different commercial selling types as well. So very interesting, yeah.
So whether I'm right, I believe so. Volvo Cars' strategy will be to be 50% full battery electric and sold online by 2025. That's not a long way away.
It's for people of our age, Peter. It's not that long away at all. It's one of those things that when it was announced, I thought, really? Having been part of Nissan when the Leaf was launched so many years ago, are we really going to push that hard and that fast to do what we want to do? But the numbers and the ambition is there. It's 50%, so 600,000 all electric vehicles all sold online. 50% of the model lineup by 2025. So the target is 1.2 million cars a year, 600,000 electric, all through global online business sales, which, when you say that to an older person like myself, makes you sit back and think for a minute about, okay, understand, what does that mean for us? And I'm still trying to get my head around that, if I'm totally honest, because I think the commercial world is also trying to understand how do we bridge that gap between where we are now and where we need to be in 4 years and 6 months' time or 7 months' time. And I think, some of the stuff that's happening with Polestar, online sales, Care by Volvo, subscription servicing and stuff like that is all good information for us to learn. And I am now part of a team that is looking at how we support global online sales of XC40 BEV in the US when we do the next model year change and whatever that means in terms of customer expectations. So, yeah, I think it's going to be quite challenging, but maybe it's not in areas that we traditionally thought. That many electric cars, that much software update, the beauty of which should all be over the air, hopefully. But just keeping up with the technology change and everything that goes with it, as well as, I suppose, the infrastructure to support the different demands of an electric car versus ICE and PHEV. which I think the industry does understand and comprehend, but maybe OEMs need to give much more forward visibility.
Yeah.
Like Volvo is effectively saying, all right, we're going to do 600,000 cars in 4 years and 7 months. As our volume grows, it's going to get a higher percentage. You're going to need the charging capability and facilities to do that. So I think as OEMs, we have a responsibility to make sure that we are sharing all of that information up front, and maybe being a bit more intelligent in our sourcing strategies and what we're doing, and likely have to build some more strategic partnerships because people will need to invest. Yeah. So yeah, it's interesting. I haven't been as excited about the world of automotive and outbound logistics as I have been for the past year, and looking forward for some time. Yeah, in terms of the change and the speed of change that needs to be brought to do it.
I agree totally with you on that. It's a new lease of life to a certain degree, and it's making us having to explore all new opportunities. Yes. But what I'm looking at the numbers, and we're looking at 600,000 vehicles. What impact is that going to be for the carrier, though, given how many less battery electric vehicles can they transport on one transporter than they were originally with all the ICE?
I think that's a bit of a conundrum for everybody right now, and I would say that because I think I mentioned this, I don't know how many years ago in a number of conferences, that weight as a factor, and axle weight in particular, has something the industry has always managed to get around to a degree, or it's been accepted by the OEMs. A particular vehicle, maybe with a 3-litre engine and gearbox in it versus a 1.6, has its limitations on what you can put in trucks. But I really think that the trailer manufacturers have to become a bit more creative in terms of what we can do within legislation. If I can give a real example, Peter, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, when I was part of the Nissan organization, we had a challenge of improving load factor from the plant in Sunderland down to the port of Tyne, purely because of the rate of climb of the volume coming out of the plant. And we felt all we could get on a transporter was 8 cars because of size of Qashqai and everything else, within the legislative limits of the country in the UK. And then we brought in trailer manufacturers, truck manufacturers, and over a period of a year, we had a project whereby ultimately we ended up having a trailer configuration from one trailer manufacturer and a truck setup that allowed us to increase to 9, giving an efficiency improvement of 16%, which, you know, maybe it doesn't sound a lot, but actually translated into, I can't remember off the top of my head, how many less trucks a year we were going to use on moving nearly 400,000 cars a year to a port. It was significant. It wasn't just about the cost side of it. It was about the utilization of trucks on the road, sustainability and everything that went with it. It was the total package. So when we talk about sustainability, it ticked the boxes on cost, it ticked it on CO2, it ticked everything. And we also at the same time tried to electrify the decks on the trailers so that you didn't need a power takeoff valve running on a diesel engine. And at the time, the technology just wasn't there to support that. Now, 6 years down the line or 5 years down the line, maybe it's different and maybe it does exist. So I think, yes, the challenge is there. I think for a period of time, OEMs will have the luxury of a mix of ICE and a mix of electric. And I think the way that we build and produce and how we schedule the deliveries can help the transport companies as well. Do we have to be a bit more flexible in time to allow a good mix on a truck so that you're compliant with legislation? Up to a point, you can probably do that. But I think the challenge from me to the trailer and truck manufacturers is, how can we move away from what is maybe the common accepted traditional type of trailers that we have and start thinking now, 3 years down the line, how are we going to fit in all of these electric cars, you know, on certain floors? And I'm happy to work with people. I'm going to do that through a supply base here, because we just made a strategic change of moving away from one supplier to DFDS on our flow volumes from Torslanda down to the Gothenburg port, because DFDS provide us with the Euro bridge down again. So it makes sense to have one provider looking after it. And traditionally, DFDS are not automotive in terms of cars, but we've given them the challenge, they've accepted it, but we've given them effectively a 5-year deal to get them to invest in different technology, more sustainable, but hopefully also work with trailer providers and truck providers to come up with something that gives us more on a truck than we've got now, and with different fuel, let's say.
Okay.
So I think if OEMs, trailer manufacturers, LSPs get together and they get creative, you can do it, is my message. Yeah.
And you touched on infrastructure to start with. From my perspective, given the sheer volume of vehicles that there are always on a port, and all right, there will be challenges when we've got a mixed element and having to sort of locate them in different areas from a health and safety or potential fire perspective and everything else as well. But do you think the way forward from a port with regard to infrastructure really should be wireless charging on the port, so people are not having to mess about cabling up, and literally then the vehicle that is in need of topping up to its 10% can be remote in terms of software induced, if you want to call it that?
Yeah, I think it's a great comment, Peter. I would say in an ideal world, yes. The investment required to do that would be the challenge, I suspect. But most ports have a significant part to play in the community. There are obviously various incentives that are running and are kicking off again in terms of moving to sustainable solutions and the things that we can do. And I think part of that is having the right infrastructure and network so that people aren't, you're not moving cars to go to a charging facility. Any movement is something that we don't want. And I think wireless charging is something that should be investigated. Lots of OEMs have a vision of street lighting being also the source of wireless charging for electrification and cars. So yes, I think it's a great point. I think where you have strategic ports like we do in the port of Gothenburg, it's something we should actively discuss with the port, because we bring cars in and we export cars out. And actually I have a number of working groups with the port on like one road to the port and stuff like that to take shorter routes and to make it more efficient and more sustainable. And I think it's a great point. And I think the port of Gothenburg, as an example, wants to be carbon neutral by 2025 as well. So that type of thing is something that can be put to major ports who have local authority support, let's say, and even private ownership. Can you do it? Yes or no?
Also, if you look at the energy aspect, of course, the port's ideally placed for wind and energy. Do you think there'll be greater utilisation of that? I know Newcastle Sunderland are moving forward pretty strongly on that. Well,
they're very lucky in that you have some of the biggest offshore wind sites in the world in the North Sea, just not that far from them. But one of the things from a Volvo Cars perspective in terms of sustainability is, and this may be a bit of news to if there's any LSPs that are currently working for Volvo Cars listening. Part of our tendering activity now is very much around the sustainability side. And one of the things that I've been tasked with, along with many others, is that the suppliers that we use with infrastructure, so compounds or ports, must be carbon neutral on their energy usage by 2025. So by the end of 2025, everything that Volvo Cars puts through the pipeline from an outbound perspective, whatever the compound, whatever the terminal, part of the criteria for us putting cars through it will be on your energy consumption, electricity, heating, cooling, all of that must be using sustainable energy. Okay. So that might be a bit of news to people today, but that's something that's been developing over the last 4 to 6 weeks, and it will be part of our tender activity moving forward.
So realistically, with what you've discussed, cooperation is, which it's always been to a certain degree, but it's a greater cooperation now, isn't it? It's not just a carrier and an OEM. It's the bigger picture totally. Are you looking at working groups for that already, or?
I think from our point of view, and certainly mine, we are engaging a lot with suppliers in terms of what we're doing. We are doing external working groups, like I just touched on. We've got external working groups on a number of activities with the Port of Gothenburg. I think as we design our new strategic network moving forward for Volvo Cars, because Volvo Cars is a very, very traditional, when I came in, or old style even, I would say, one point of entry, one supplier per market network. And in recent stuff that we've done, we've started to change that. And we're now actively looking for multiple points of entry where it makes sense. We're now looking for multiple suppliers where it makes sense. And certainly where we have infrastructure dependency, we will be spending a lot of time talking to the infrastructure owners, if they are not the operators, about what our expectations are if we are to continue to use their facilities. Only this afternoon, a couple of hours ago, I was talking to the Port of Barcelona about Barcelona as a port, which we don't use currently, but has come out as something that we may want to use in the future as our volume from China increases. So it's quite interesting you mention it. For sure, we will have more and more direct talks with infrastructure owners where we put cars through, just to make sure that they are part of that discussion with the operators and understanding what our requirements are.
We also touched earlier on online purchasing of vehicles. Given the fact that people are buying online and they've removed that initial contact, which was always a fear of not meeting face to face at the dealer level, does it make sense, therefore, that the handover of the vehicle would be moving to the hands of an LSP rather than going to a showroom, because they don't know them anywhere at the garage anyway, for want of a better word? So.
Yeah, I need to be careful what I say here because of certain countries where there are very strong relationships. But what I would say is that for many, many years, people have, through leasing companies across the globe, leased cars and had vehicles delivered direct to them. Right? My wife being one of them many years ago. And I think the B2C element with global online business necessitates the capability for us to be able to do direct customer handover. And if I look at the Polestar model, which is why I'm saying we're doing some forerunners with the different brands, we're learning a lot from it. We do direct customer handover in China. We're looking to do direct customer handovers here in Europe, if it's not through a Volvo dealership. And we're using people like Uptime, who obviously have a relationship with Volvo itself, to facilitate that type of stuff. And I think because we've been having that activity for a period of time, I would expect that it grows. And I think the strategic decision for Volvo Cars is probably on a market-to-market level, Peter, in all honesty, because the market level will dictate the capability, I think. Strategically, we will decide whether it's Volvo doing it or whether it's through an LSP. I think if we think about full circular economy and full vehicle life cycle, maybe the right answer in a lot of ways is through the LSP network, because they do a lot of that business already. But I would stress, I think it will be market by market. We'll make a strategic decision about, do we have the capability to support B2C all the way through the pipeline? Is it something that we want to do on a market-to-market basis? Because some cultures maybe for them it isn't the right thing in the next 3 to 5 years, you know? So I think on case by case, market by market, that will be driven by, we have a big commercial transformation team set up now across the business, so multifunctional, And in the supply chain world, we're looking at things like ops planning in terms of production planning and everything else, as well as distribution. What do we really need across the globe? So it's quite a big activity that will run for the next 2 to 3 years, for sure. Yeah.
Looking at a supply basis perception, do you think they're developing fast enough to be proactive as we move forward?
I've seen examples in the last year of companies that are now fully integrated with some OEMs in a full vehicle life cycle. And it's very interesting to see it. It's the type of thing that I was talking about years ago, about suppliers tapping into this additional value chain opportunity, because it will bring more profitability opportunity for them and growth opportunity for them in the business world. And I've seen with a few suppliers, one very close to my own door right now, that they are big into the full life cycle, offering services to certain OEMs from new vehicles through to recycled auction cars with delivery cross-border in the whole of Europe. So I think there are a number of LSPs out there that have done it, have made that recognition that we can't as a business fully survive on just moving new cars. We have to tap into the full life cycle of the car. We have to offer the services that maybe the OEM doesn't want to do in-house. Even customer handovers I've seen taking place. But I think, is the majority of the business doing that? No, I still think that 75, 80% of the network out there is still focusing on its core traditional business, and maybe not in that big full vehicle life cycle offering. And I think they should look at it very strongly. I've only recently had some discussions with the supplier and said, you need to get into this, because more and more, if OEMs do it directly, they're going to look for the service, and if you're not offering it, then you won't get the business. So yeah, I still think there's a lot more work to be done in that regard, and I very much would like lots of suppliers coming to us saying we do have these full services.
I think we've got a sort of one of the questions across, or a couple there. If we could touch those, and then we could sort of cover other bits afterwards, if that's all right with you.
That's fine.
Can you see it all okay?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let me see. At the moment, we have supply chains for ICVs and hybrids. The pandemic, I suppose. I'm going to sort of flip that back round, Peter.
Okay.
I'm going to say, despite all of the disruption, what we have seen is a supply chain that's been able to adapt and to continue to deliver where possible what it can. I think invested capacity in critical parts, which is effectively what the question is about, is something that a lot of people have been seeing Toyota manage really well. Okay. Not that I really want to talk about another OEM here, but I'll mention it because it's been part of other conferences recently. And I think probably what it is doing is triggering a reevaluation of, on our setup of part supply to plants or even after sales, are we holding the right amount of product to support what we need to do? And I think that evaluation is going on across many OEMs right now. And I think what you will see is very quickly, and I would say within this year, I don't think it'll be something that will drag on for a long period of time. I think you will see very quickly a step change on certain parts where there is a critical dependency, depending on the sourcing footprint of those parts and the distances to be traveled.
Yeah.
Okay. And I can, Texas last year caught a lot of people out in terms of production in the US. And in a lot of cases, earlier this year, in a lot of cases, the distance wasn't as big as China, Europe, but it was very difficult to get the parts to where people needed them to be, and it impacted on production. So again, it doesn't need to be 10,000 kilometers away. It can be in your own country. Yeah. And obviously the US is very big, but it can still impact on you. So I think that evaluation will be looking more at critical to line side to keep the business running. How much on a hand inventory do we want to have? But I'll just re-emphasize what I said before about outbound. I think outbound and general cargo supply chain transportation has been magnificent, actually, in the way that it's handled the pandemic.
From an outside perspective, I agree totally. Yeah. They've really done a superb job across the board and are continuing to do so. Yeah. Because it's difficult for everybody. Every carrier, every shipping company, every whatever. And I think there's been a great pulling together through this, which hopefully will be the first steps to making it an even stronger supply base in terms of from order all the way through to handover. But sort of we are getting close on timing. What advice would you give to a supplier or provider of services for you that actually want to work with Volvo who haven't historically worked? What do you want from them?
I think one of the things I would say to supply base generally is typically they wait till there's a tender. And for me, that's the wrong way. You know, you don't just see marketing in a supermarket when you go into a supermarket. It's on the TV all the time. It's on advertising hoardings. It's even us as selling cars. You don't just see cars in the showroom. You see them being advertised on the television. You see them being in advertising hoardings in airports. Not that you've seen much of that lately, but I would say make yourself known. Take the time and effort to sell yourself even before you find out there's a tender on the market. If you have a real aspiration to do business with an OEM on a perimeter that you're confident that you can deliver on, share your information, your company information, ask for a meeting. I know out of the last conference that I did, I had a number of inquiries and I steered them to my engineering teams to be able to do presentations along with purchase so that people become aware. And then once you've made yourself aware, yes, to be part of that purchasing process, you've got to get approval from the world of purchase and everything else that goes with it as being a fit and proper company to do the business. But unless you make that first step of taking the time and effort to introduce yourself without having business, then are you ever going to be a consideration? And the answer is probably not. Yeah. And actually, it's not just the suppliers, it's infrastructure owners who have operators on ports or terminals. Tell us what you can do and what you'd like to do, you know, to support our business.
Okay, that's really interesting. Thanks. We are literally on time. Any other point you want to raise?
The one thing I'd like to pick up on is our network design and aspiration. We are doing, I think it's literally just under 1 billion SEK of tender activity this year, which is some intercontinental European, UK business that we're doing. And next year it'll be even more again. And we have an aim, and this is more a notification for the future. At some point for Volvo Cars, in maybe the next 2 to 3 years, we're going to be lining up all of our contracts to do a global tender on our business, so that we can maximize the opportunities of synergies across the globe. Okay. And within that will be some of the stuff that we've talked about that will come out of the strategic task force on commercial setup, where we're asking for additional services maybe, or we're doing it ourselves or have the capability of doing it. So keep an eye on what Volvo Cars is doing. Keep an eye on its progression on tender activity. And finally, make yourself known if you've got something that you want us to do together. It's going to be a big story in the next few years in terms of Volvo car network design and implementation. Yeah.
Perfect. That's a perfect one to finish on, I think. Thank you. Thank everybody for sort of tuning in and watching. And I know people will do a lot on our on-demand section to be able to watch afterwards if something pressing has stopped them watching live, for want of a better word. And it was really informative, really interesting, and hopefully, you know, sort of magic wand, God willing, whatever, that we are able to at least get some in-person time in 2021, because we didn't get any in 20. So
yeah, the good news is we've still managed. That's the
we
big
did. We managed, and we've learned a lot.
Okay, super, Peter. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers
All the
now.
best. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye. Hi, it's Peter again, and thank you for watching the session. Don't forget you can connect with all members within the EV community. Send messages to each other and start to build relationships for the future. Also, take a look at our supplier showrooms. Our partners have got lots of products and services that they have to offer, which again could be of benefit to you. Make the most of the opportunity, and thank you again for joining us.